Hi, everybody. How you doing? Somebody asked for Yoda, so this is just for you. Hope you're all doing well. It's beautiful outside, and if this were a normal spring quarter, I know what would happen. People would stop coming to class, and they'd be going out to the beach and all that sort of thing, which I can certainly understand. These things do happen. And I've also noticed that, in fact, people have been coming to the synchronous lectures less and less, which is okay. I understand things come up during the quarter, and hopefully people will continue to watch the videos online. But I also know that this is the time of the quarter that people start to get a little antsy. And so I think what we'll do for today's lecture is try to make it as entertaining as possible. So there'll be a little I guess, animation, a little magic, and a little comedy. And in fact, if you are interested, think about one of your favorite one-liner jokes. We might need it later on in the class. So don't type it in yet, but I'm going to ask you to type it in later on if you have one. Please make it appropriate for all audiences, and we'll try to have as much fun as possible. We are having fun, though, talking about touch, which we've been doing for the last few classes. And remember, touch is one of the most important concepts for us to understand neuroplasticity. And then we started talking about some of this really kind of amazing things that can be done with touch with regard to perceiving speech through touch. And then we started talking about perceiving objects without actually feeling them. And that came from being able to kind of just shake things back and forth and know the entire expanse of an object, even though your skin's not feeling it. And now we'll continue to talk about that type of thing in the context of using tools, which is kind of the same sort of idea. So let's do that. I will get rid of Yoda. Oh, boy. Yoda's really nice. Some of these animations are just wonderful. I don't know if any of you folks make these, but they are very, very impressive. Okay. Goodbye, Yoda. Hello, me. Oh, there's my green screen, the secret green screen that you've always wanted to see, the behind the curtain. But let's go ahead and give it a nice background. There we go. Let's keep with the Star Wars theme today. Okay, so what we're going to do today is continue to talk about touch by continuing our discussion of tool use, or what I'm calling proxy touch. So let's go ahead and put that up and remind you what we were talking about the last time we met. That was fly fishing, of all things. And it was really fun to interview this guy, Rick Pasek. Rick, as I said, not only does fly fishing, he teaches it. He teaches it professionally. He's considered one of the most important teachers up in Canada where he works, and he's written a number of books on fly fishing. And he just loves it, and he loves teaching it. So he had a lot of interesting things to say about it, including the fact that you can actually feel a lot of detail about the fish that you're catching just by how it jiggles the rod. And I say, is this, kind of something that you can watch? And he says, yeah, but up there, the water's, kind of muddy. He fishes in rivers, and not only that, but there's a lot of current. So really, what you have to do is mostly through feel on how the rod is being vibrated as it catches a fish. He can feel just in the handle things like the size of the fish, the species of the fish, whether it's a rock bass versus a big mouth bass, the gender of the fish, the age and experience of the fish, all these types of things just from the vibrations in the rod. And one of the most important things, of course, is how the fish is swimming. And we ended up talking about the fact that the fish, especially the experienced ones, know how to get the hook out of their mouth. And that is through diving down deep into the water and then diving up high out of the water to loosen the line, and therefore have the best chance to loosen the hook in its mouth and get away. These are, all catch and release fish, and so they've gone through this a number of times. And so what he teaches all of his students to do is when they feel like a little slack, and then they feel that the line is going down, that the fish is taking the line down, he'll tell them to bow to the fish, which kind of tightens the line down if the fish comes up, and we'll keep the hook in the fish's mouth so they can reel them in. And this is the idea of proxy touch, that he's able to feel so much from the rod as he's fishing, which is really cool. And proxy touch is just the general idea that we're touching things through a tool. So let's go ahead and put this up. So this is just touch through a tool. Whenever we are using some sort of tool to feel something, that would be an example of proxy touch. And I think this is one of the coolest examples, this fishing example, but it's really something we do all the time when we're using a tool. So, we're holding a pen, for example. If you're taking notes now on a piece of paper, you're using proxy touch to know kind of what the resistance of the paper is as you make your marks on that paper. And you're able to tell the resistance, kind of the composition of the paper, how much texture there is to the paper through the vibrations on the pen as you're writing. And that's, again, just something that we're able to feel without directly having skin contact with it. We're able to feel that through the vibrations on the pen itself. So that type of thing would be certainly considered proxy touch. What else? Mixing. Okay, so this is the great thing. One of the great things about remote teaching is I have tools. And here's a great tool you probably have in your house somewhere. It's a simple tool, but it is a tool we use when we're mixing soups or mixing some sort of stew or something like that. Yes, you can tell how thick a soup is, for example, by looking at it to some degree. But more than that, you're able to tell the thickness of the soup by feeling the resistance of the soup against the spoon as you mix it. And that, of course, is going to be conveyed through the kind of mechanical vibrations of the spoon itself to your fingers. So the other day I was making a soup with my wife, asparagus soup, which the kids hate, but we really like it. And we like to have it thick, and that's the only way that kids will eat it, if they're going to eat it at all. So we figured it up with like potatoes or something like that. And to know how many potatoes to put in it, we mix it around with the spoon to get a sense of how thick it is. And yes, as I said, you can certainly look at it, but probably you could do this as well without looking at it, just because you'd be able to feel the resistance of a thick spoon against, a thick soup against the spoon as you're turning it around the soup. And that, again, is conveyed through vibrations through the spoon itself. And whenever you're using silverware, okay, whenever you're using a fork or a knife, it's the same type of thing. You know how much to press down on the thing you're cutting because of the resistance that's kind of induced on the silverware, which then gets conveyed to your skin, and not only your skin, but your tendons as well. As that, we've talked about that before. Certainly one of the most impressive examples, I think, of proxy touch is something we've talked about already as well, and that's our friend John Bramblett. And his situation is just amazing. And remember, he used to have to touch the painting's raised lines to know where he should kind of keep within the lines in order to paint different colors. But then after a while, he said he didn't even need to do that anymore. So that picture you see of John right there touching with his left hand was taken a long time ago. These days, all he needs to do is kind of use the paintbrush across an area, and he can feel the little raised lines as the paintbrush hits those lines. And so he can do something else with his left hand and know to stop adding the paint to that area as the raised line is kind of causing resistance in the brush. And not only that, I mean, maybe even more impressive is the idea that he can mix paints based on the paint's texture. Remember, we talked about this being a factor that goes into using oil paints. They're made of different material, and it allows him to know what paint he's using by the texture of the paint, which he used to have to feel with his left hand, get his left hand all icky, but he doesn't need to do that anymore. Just by putting some paints together and then just, kind of pulling his paintbrush across that mixed paint, he can know whether he has a dark gray or a light gray. And it's the same idea. It's proxy touch, being able to feel things through tools. And it's just a tremendous thing that you don't think about, is that you're touching things, you're having a touch experience of things without actually having any skin contact with them at all. We'll talk about some of the research on this in just a second, but I wanted just give you one more anecdote. I think it's in the book, but I think you'll find it interesting. Not only when he's fishing does Rick PSYC get to use this proxy touch through the rod, but in a way, the fish can use it too. So the fish are actually touching the line, or touching the line and rod through the vibrations that are occurring in the hook. I know it's a little icky, but it's just it's not a lot. It's not a lot of pain for the fish, as far as we know. But they're feeling it through the hook. So there are certain vibrations that are occurring in the hook that's in contact with the fish's skin. And what that allows to do is the fish will know generally where the fisherman is located relative to its current position. So what Rick has told me is a smart fish, one that's been hooked and thrown back often, will know that the smartest thing it can do to not be pulled out of the boat, which of course it hates, is to swim to where the boat is located. And they will know to do that based on having a loose connection between the hook and its skin. As long as they can keep that loose and swim in a direction that keeps it loose, they know that the line is becoming more and more slack. And the idea for the fish is to swim underneath the boat, because once it does that, it can get kind of tangled in the anchor chain or something like that. And Rick says that's the thing that you fear most as a fisherman, that the fish is going to go under the boat and stay there, because at that point there's not much you can do. You usually have to cut the line. And the fish is able to do that because it is using the hook and the line as a proxy touch tool to know where the fisherman is. So it works both ways. And Rick said it's smart fish will do this, and there's just not a whole lot he can do about it, which is pretty cool. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the research that has been conducted on proxy touch. I think you'll find this really interesting. One of the first research domains that this is tested in is by asking people to perceive things through using what we can call little probes. And it would be something like this. I just want to make sure we can see it. Can you see this okay? Yeah. It'd be something like this. So people would put something like this in their fingers. Maybe it'd be out of plastic, not metal, but it would be the same idea. And then what they would do is they'd be asked to feel different gratings. And these are gratings like we've seen before that have been used to measure touch. As you can see, there's a little plastic grating here. There we go, right here. And imagine you're looking at this from the side, and it's smaller than this. Imagine it's about half the size of this, and it's made out of plastic. And there's little grating lines here. And the question is, what do you think people would be more sensitive with when judging these grating lines? Would it be something that we could feel better through our fingers or better through the probe? And so imagine that the shallowness of this grating here, how shallow. Right now, looks like a pretty deep grating here, but it can make it very shallow. So it would be more challenging for you to know whether the lines go in one direction or another direction. And the question would be, would this be something that would be easier with your finger to determine or with a probe to determine? And as it turns out, you can see here based on what I wrote on the slide, people are as sensitive at knowing the orientation of these little grating lines, these little raised grating lines, as if they're using a probe, as when they're actually drawing their skin across that grating line. They are as sensitive not touching it as they are touching it, because the vibrations come through the probe and actually contact the fingers here. So it's a great example of how sensitive we can be to a very subtle texture using a tool rather than using our own skin. Okay, the big picture here is we think of touch as involving our skin, and it does, but often you can touch things, but more often than that, you touch things through tools, and tools can convey texture and a lot of detail about an object through how that tool vibrates on our fingers, and then kind of also changes the orientation of the tendons and muscles in our fingers and hands. What else has been tested? Well, canes. And there's been a lot of research on canes, and maybe you're not that surprised about that based on how we know something uh, about the way the blind use canes, right? So, you've seen blind individuals using those white canes, and I should mention that the white canes are fixed with a very kind of special type of tip. It's a tip that does two things. You're going to find this as being in this class and knowing something about sound as well. The tip is a hard metal tip that when hit against the ground creates a good sound for echolocation. So that's the first thing. The tip is designed for sound, but it is also designed for touch. It's designed to kind of pick up the texture of whatever a blind person is touching with the cane and conveying that up the cane to the person's fingers. So canes are designed for both of those purposes, to convey sound information and to convey touch information. So there's been a lot of research conducted with canes, and just some of the things that have been determined, and this is done sometimes with blind individuals, but often it's done with sighted individuals who are just blindfolded, intro psychology students, for example. And what is found is that people are astonishingly good at judging things like the vertical and horizontal distance of a cane. So here's a little cane I have right here. And people are just, people who are blindfolded before they come into a laboratory room are asked to judge the distance of something they can't see. Actually, this example here has the cane kind of occluded by a big board, but they can be blindfolded as well. And they're asked to judge things like how far something is away horizontally to them, okay? How far something is away vertically to them. And needless to say, they are very good at it. And they are very good at it even if they are given different size canes. So there's information when you touch something with a cane, not only about how far something is away, but also how big that cane is. And that's something they're probably able to determine as they're moving the cane, and it's kind of shaping the muscles and tendons that have those great sensors in them, which is really cool. And again, these are just blindfolded folks or folks that have some occlusion so they can't see the cane that have never been asked to do this before, but they can do it readily. Blind people are a little bit more accurate, but this is something that you could do in a matter of minutes in this type of experiment. Other things that have been shown to be possible with a cane, passageways. So, we've done experiments like this in our laboratory, not with canes, but with sound, where you set up a kind of an occlusion in a room where somebody comes in and has to determine whether that occlusion, that quote passageway or doorway, is large enough for a person to fit through, for a perceiver to fit through. And in this type of experiment, people will come in and not be able to see whether that doorway, that passageway is large enough. They'll have to do it another way. And in this case, they'll do it through grabbing a cane and kind of feeling it. And they'll be very, very precise and say, oh, this type of passageway is not big enough for me to fit through just by walking straight into. But this type of passageway, yes. And they'll get it down to, within an inch of what their specific, area is that's needed to go through that passage. Basically, what they're doing here is they're judging the passageway relative to their shoulder width. Okay, makes sense, because if it's a little bigger than your shoulder width, you would be able to pass through it. If it's smaller, you would not be able to pass through it, at least in this orientation. And people are within an inch of getting that right, even though they've never been asked to judge a passageway by using a cane before. Again, all this really sophisticated detail that comes through how the vibrations that are carried through an object come to the skin and also affect the muscles and tendons. Other things, real quickly, floor gaps, and this is something that the blind have to do often. They have to determine whether if there's a gap in the sidewalk, if there's a gap at the curb relative to the street, they have to know whether to step down or not, or whether they can step over that little break in the sidewalk. This is something the blind do all the time. And yes, the blind can do this in these sort of experiments, but so could you. You'd be able to tell whether a gap size, as we're showing here in this particular image, is something that you could step over or something that you would have to either jump to or step down and then step up off of. And again, that's going to be different for different people, right? So for someone like me and Yoda that have small legs, that's going to be a smaller distance than for someone like Shaquille O'Neal, who has these gigantic legs and can certainly walk over a gap size that I can't. I would be very good, as would Shaq, at using a cane and determining whether or not that gap size was step overable for me or for Shaq. Okay, so all these things are readily doable for anybody, regardless of their experience with canes. And then the last thing is inclines, and this is another kind of similar experiment where people are blindfolded. They come up to a ramp and they feel the ramp with their cane. Okay, they feel the ramp with their cane, and they're asked, "Is this a ramp that you think you could climb up without falling back, or how about this one?" And they're not able to see it. They're just touching it with their canes. They're going back and forth for a few seconds with their canes, and they are very precise relative to their own body dimensions. What I could traverse up, in this case, I might be better than Shaq. Hey, there you go. I could probably walk up a ramp that has a higher incline than Shaq because of our center of gravity being different. Mine's certainly lower than his. And I would be able to determine the right ramp for me to be able to climb up, not by looking at it, but by just touching it indirectly through proxy touch. It's the same sort of thing. All these things are very good. The cool thing about this is, when it comes to judging vertical and horizontal distance and passageways and floor gaps and inclines, all those instances, I would be, and you would be, and Shaq would be as accurate in making that judgment with a cane as you would be making those judgments with vision. In other words, you would think that vision's the dominant sense. Vision is the sense that's going to give us the most accurate information about these sort of things, right? But when it comes to using a cane, a proxy tool such as a cane, to make these judgments, you would be as accurate through that means as you would be through vision, which is pretty amazing given that you've probably rarely have ever used a cane or some sort of long object to make these specific judgments before. Yeah, the blind were probably a little bit better than us at making these sort of judgments, but your accuracy would come very close to what your accuracy would be with vision, which is just astonishing based on the fact that you've never done it. Okay, a couple more things I wanted to mention about proxy touch, because I think this stuff is so cool. First of all, we talk about proxy touch as being used through tools like a cane, like the probe, like the spoon I just discussed. But there are proxy touch examples that really involve one's own body. And actually, this is an area that's discussed a lot and studied often when it comes to animals. So we're talking about here built-in proxy touch, which is the type of proxy touch which occurs when an animal has something on their body, including us, that can be used as a tool to feel something that our skin is not touching. Okay, so for example, whiskers. Okay, that's one cute kitty cat. All right, I said this was going to be a fun class, and I forgot to mention there's going to be a cute kitty cat. So there you go. And that cute kitty cat has these wonderful whiskers, as do rats and other mammals, especially ones that hang out close to the ground. And you might know that whiskers, especially for rodents, are not just there to make them cute. Okay, rat whiskers are cute as anything, right? They are there for them to perceive space, especially the space of, say, an aperture, the space of a passageway. So at night, when a rat really can't use its vision very well and wants to know whether it can go through its little rat passageway to go out and look for food, or it finds a new passageway and it needs to know whether it can kind of crawl through it, it will use its little whiskers. How do I do whiskers? Okay, there I am, whiskers. It will use its little whiskers to determine the width of that hole. And as the whiskers get kind of moved by the interior parts of that passageway, the inside of the doorway here, okay, the rat will know how big that passageway is. I mean, this is absolutely established. You can do lots of little experiments on rats to show that they absolutely do use this, as do many other rodents, and cats in some instances do. They use their whiskers to determine something about the spaces they can crawl through. In fact, I just remembered this. I was just asked to be on a dissertation in another department, biology, on the perception of space by rats who are using their whiskers to do this. So this is considered a really kind of fundamental way of testing touch perception for rodents, and then understanding the brain, of course, and how that integrates it. And one of the reasons it's so interesting is because there are no sensory fibers at the end of the whisker or throughout the entire length of the whisker, right? It's like hair, right? Basically, we don't have sensory fibers here, which is why we don't, feel it when we get a haircut. Well, I feel it when we get a haircut. It's depressing for me at all times, but most of us don't. And the reason is because we have no sense organs in our hair. Where there are sense organs, however, is where the whisker contacts the skin. Okay, so where the skin makes contact with the whisker, there's a vibration there that is induced from when the whisker's end touches something like the inner part of a doorway. And in that sense, a whisker is like a tool for a rat, right? Here's my little tool. We can make it even this. It's a probe. Here I am, Rosenblum, the cat with a little whisker probe here, and I've got to figure out whether I can go through the door. I'll be Rosenblum the rat, as rats do this more often. And I say, oops, no, I can't go through this doorway because this whisker is telling me that this doorway is too narrow. It is essentially proxy touch, but it's proxy touch using a part of an animal's own body. It's proxy touch because the only nerve endings where the information is conveyed is through the vibrations of the whisker that hits the nerve endings in the skin. And the same thing is true. You can think of other animals. Beaks in birds is the same thing. There's, beaks are essentially like nails. There's no nerve endings in the beak itself. It's only at where the beak makes contact with the skin. And the same thing with horns. In all these cases, animals are able to perceive things in the world that are able to make contact with different surfaces, and then those contacts are conveyed through the tool. Okay, what else? Do we have any of these things? And I would suggest yes, as would a lot of scientists, that our fingernails can actually be used for proxy touch. Now, this is something that if you've ever done woodworking, you might know, especially fine woodworking, where you're really trying to make something that looks good. You've talked to people who do this. Yes, you can look at the a surface that you've been sanding, that you've been smoothing of wood to know whether it is smooth. You can then use your skin to tell whether it's been smoothed. But you can sometimes use your nail, and the vibrations of the nail against the skin, okay, can tell you something even more about that. So sometimes when you're working on wood, this is something I know that I've talked to people who make guitars, and what they'll do is they'll have to smooth out a piece of wood, a surface of wood that has a ridge in it, and that ridge has to be taken away. Basically, it has a little indentation, and you have to sand the wood down so you don't have that indentation, that little line indentation in there anymore. And when they do that, they will keep sanding until they can't see the indentation, but it still could be there. So what they'll do then is they'll touch it with their skin to make sure, but they said the best way to know whether that indentation is there or not is to use your nail and kind of scrape over it. And if you feel your nail catching on that ridge, you know you have to sand more. And so people who work on wood will very often, not cut their nails so far down that they'll not be able to use the nail as a kind of proxy touch tool. So that's one example of how we have our built-in proxy touch as well. Okay, so sometimes you'll see people who are, doing some sort of mechanical, wood design or something like that, have nails that are a tiny bit longer, or at least one nail is just a tiny bit longer to be able to feel that. What else do we have? Well, we have teeth. And the argument has been made that teeth are our ultimate proxy touch tool, because we use teeth, which As you know, the enamel itself doesn't have any nerves inside of it. Of course, there's, in the middle of it there is a nerve, but you can touch your tooth and know that it's like a nail, that it actually is like something that doesn't have nerves all the way through it. It does have nerves where it makes contact, with the gum and all that stuff. But it is like a proxy touch tool. So we are accurate when we're chewing on food, for the most part, to not bite down too hard or to bite down too soft, possibly because our teeth are acting like proxy touch tools to tell our gums what the vibrations are as we're chewing. That then tells our brain how much effort we need to make in order to be an effective chewer. So teeth can also become proxy touch tools. And in fact, there are experiments showing that you can use your teeth as probes in this type of experiment we've talked about before. That people can use, especially, you can imagine this, the front teeth with their eyes closed, they can tell you the orientation of ridges. And you can imagine, the front teeth right there that have kind of that little line going down. Those ridges will tell you something about, the teeth will tell you something about the orientation of the ridges. And then finally, I just wanted to say a little bit before we leave this part of proxy touch, and that is that we do know when we're using proxy touch, especially if we're using it all the time, like if you're a soup maker or a chef that spends a lot of time making stews and soups, and you have to do a lot of mixing. If you're somebody who works with nails, or that's what this is really for, kind of doing precision nailing, if you're making guitars, that sort of thing, you do see the kind of arrangement of the touch brain kind of shifting around to make a space for the tool that's being always used. So even though it is it's not going to get its own map really in the brain, if in fact you use a screwdriver regularly in your work or something like that, you'll see more area is given to the fingers that are using the screwdriver for the touch part of the brain, as if it's making room for precision touch with that screwdriver. So in a sense, we do have kind of a shift in the brain that's a little different depending on the tool we're using, which is really interesting. Okay, let's take a little break there and take some questions. Looks like there's already some questions. Oh, people love Yoda. Thank you. I'm so glad, you Yoda fans. Aida asks, did John Bramblett also use proxy touch to feel the resistance of lines? Yes, absolutely. He used the brush in order to feel the resistance of lines as he was painting, to make sure he was within the lines when he was coloring a certain patch on the canvas. Nicole asks, was John Bramblett able to tell which color he was using through proxy touch? Yes, never mind, you addressed it, okay. Aida asks, would Helen Keller use proxy touch? I'm sure she would. I mean, we all use proxy touch when we're stirring soup, or when we're writing on paper or something like that. So that's the case. But would Helen Keller, who is blind and deaf, use it in a way that the rest of us didn't? I don't know. It's a very good question. I don't think she could use it. Could you use proxy touch for Tadoma as an example? Maybe that's the way we can think about this. And I don't think she did. I don't think Rick did. Rick Joy, who I talked about last class. But it could be that they did use it in some other way that was necessary because they couldn't see or hear the world around them. I'd have to think about that. It's a good question, Aida. Are there other questions about what we just went through, or should I give you hey, let me ask you guys a question. I'm looking at this background now. Is that really distracting? Should I change my background? Just give me a yes or no. Should I change the background? Is it really distracting? I like fancy backgrounds, but I don't want it to. No. Okay, you like the background. Good. Okay. Somebody else asked a question. How does something prime our perception of proxy touch, like sight does for taste? Wow. Benjamin asks a great question. How does something something that we see prime our proxy touch like sight does for taste. And would proxy touch be different for someone who is blind and doesn't have that priming? That's a great, great question. So let's go back to the soup where we're looking at it. And we know something about its thickness, not only from how it resists the spoon and that vibrates, but how it resists the spoon and we see it resists the spoon. Is there some sort of like kind of cross-modal influence? And would that make it different because the blind wouldn't have the visual to touch cross-modal influence? That's something that's a great question and something I feel I should know as a specialist in cross-modal perception. I do know how vision affects touch, but most of touch that's tested in these contexts is in fact touch right on the skin. So there's a number of really cool illusions where what you're looking at can affect, how your skin feels something. Okay, I know about that, but are there experiments where what you see affects your proxy touch? That you stumped me. You stumped the expert. I have to look into that. I'm trying to think if there's anything I can think of right now. I can't think of any proxy touch experiments, but I would absolutely bet there would be something like that. That's a really good question, and I'm sure it does affect it, but I don't know if there's any experiments. Great questions, folks. Really great questions. Okay, let's do one of our quick polls just for fun. Okay. Proxy touch. Okay. Okay, well, we're going to go back to a different type of proxy touch for this question. This is the type of proxy touch, or the type of touch that was introduced as feeling something without touching it. So that had to do, remember, with wielding a rod that had some sort of weight on it, or we had to determine the length of it. We had to determine the shape of it. So this is going back to the previous lecture. So here's the question, and then I'll post it for you. Feeling things without touching them, A, only works for very small objects. B, depends on perceiving a wielded object's resistance to rotation. Okay. C, cannot be done with legs or ankles. Or D, all of the above. So this is a tiny bit tricky, and I want you to think back to that previous lecture in the circumstances I said in which this works, and let's see how you do. I'll give you a full 60 seconds to do this because it is a little tricky. Doing well. Great. Okay, another 15 seconds, and then we'll take a look at it. It is a little bit of a tricky one, so I'm glad I asked it. You'll be ready for a, quote, similar question when it's on the final. Okay, I think most of you have answered it now, and I can see what happened, and I'm glad you're all here to know the correct answer to this question. So what I'm going to do is just share the result right now, and you'll see that the correct answer is in fact B. Okay, so the majority of you got it, 58% of you got it. But why isn't it all the above, which 41% of you selected? Okay, so feeling things without touching them only works for very small objects. That's not true. Most of you knew that. In other words, it works for big rods. It works for big objects at the end of a post. Remember, you can tell whether there's a pyramid or sphere at the end of a post, and it can be a smaller object or a big object. So it's not that it only works for small objects. B, it depends on perceiving a wielded object. So wielding is just moving back and forth. Resistance to rotation, and that's exactly what the explanation is, that how much different movements resist rotation is considered to be the way your brain is able to pick up all this detail of the object that's at the end of it. So that part of the answer is definitely correct, okay? C, nobody picked, cannot be done with the legs and legs. So you all remember that well. Yes, it's not just the wrist that can do this. It's the knees, the ankles, even your fingers just kind of, moving back and forth, little things, which is cool. This is not something specific to the wrist, although that's the one that's most easily studied in some ways. But all of our joints and can do this sort of thing. It's the muscle tendon system's general nature to be able to do this sort of thing. And then a lot of you said all of the above. So you might have said all of the above because all of these things were mentioned, but they were mentioned in different ways. So we did say that it can be the legs and ankles. So that leads you to reject the all of the above. And then if you look at the first one, the idea it only works for small objects. So this is an important thing when you're reading through questions to think about. Just because it reminds you of the lecture doesn't mean how it's presented is correct. So this is good. I'm glad I asked this question. It was a little bit more challenging. You'll be ready for a similar question on the final. You got the idea. All right, any last questions on this? Should we continue our lecture? All right. Oh, wait. You all saw the results, right? Yeah, okay, good. All right, all right. So let's go ahead and continue talking about Proxy Touch. And this is the last little piece of Proxy Touch I wanted to talk about, which I think you'll find really interesting. I always found this stuff really interesting. In fact, this is something that a good friend of mine did research on, and then other people have done it since. But I was in the because he was a good friend in graduate school. I was one of the subjects in the experiment. I think you'll find this interesting. So Proxy Touch is something that spiders use, and spiders are so cool. I know people get a little icky when it comes to spiders, but spiders are your friends. They're just amazing creatures. And what we're going to talk about with regard to spiders now has to do with their Proxy Touch system, which is one of the most sophisticated in nature. And you probably can anticipate what I'm talking about here. It has to do with their webs. So spiders use Proxy Touch through their webs. And maybe when you were a kid, you played with this a little bit. If you saw a nice web with a big, hefty spider in it, maybe you put your finger on the side of the web and jiggled it a little bit to see if the spider would believe you were a fly and come after it. It often does work, especially if they're really hungry. And I think it works better in the dark sometimes. They do have vision. And so if you start jiggling a little piece of the web, the spider will run after it, right? It will come in that direction. And clearly what it's doing here is it's using this kind of very complicated web in order to perceive where the fly is, right? But it does more than that. It can tell where the fly is, what the fly is doing, and how big the fly is. Okay, so it can tell all those things. It can tell when it's truly ensnared. It can tell whether it's a fly that's going to be a good hearty meal or just a snack. All these things, and I won't get into the way they test this, but all these things can be felt through touch for the spider. And you can imagine, that's a really complex sort of vibrational system that the spider has to kind of be sensitive to in order to pull this off, which is cool. So they can tell where and when. So as soon as this occurs, it knows when, so it can start going after it. It can tell where in its web it's been ensnared. It will know that it should wait a little bit before it goes after it in some cases, because it's either fully ensnared or not ensnared, that sort of thing. All those things it can tell. But one thing that's really interesting is it can not only can use its web as a proxy tool, it can design its web to be one type of proxy tool or another. This just floored me. These little guys are ridiculously smart in this way. If it's very hungry, what it's going to do is it's going to build a web that will feel even the slightest vibrations. Basically, it will be able to feel if a very small fly ends up there, right? If it's really hungry, it wants to eat anything it possibly can. The problem with doing that is sometimes the wind will shake the web a little bit, and it will have a lot of false alarms. And we'll say, oh, there we go. There's a little baby fly. And we'll go up there and say, oh, no, it was just the wind again. If it's not terribly hungry, it will want to have big flies and not have a lot of false alarms from the wind. And so it will construct its web differently. So the web construction is going to amplify the movement in such a way that it's going to be useful if it's really hungry and it wants small flies, or it's not that terribly hungry, it can wait a little bit and it's just waiting for a big fly that's really worth moving around for and doing all its fly things and eating it. So, you know, it can kind of fashion its own tool, just like people fashion their own kind of proxy touch tools to have different sorts of skills. Like, you know, think about all the different types of tools a carpenter has, or all the different types of tools. Maybe a dentist is a good one because it's very hard for them to see much of what they're doing. They have different tools to feel around different parts of teeth. The same thing with flies. They have different webs to ensnare different types of flies. That's cool. But what's also cool is that we have a similar ability. We don't make webs, right? Unless we're Spider-Man, right? But we don't make webs, but we can feel vibrations on things like string. And those vibrations can tell us a whole lot of stuff. Now, this is not something we typically need to do every day, but the fact that we're able to do it is really, really, really interesting. So for example, let's look at the method here. Somebody will be in these sort of experiments. This is me, say. Okay, yep, no hair, that's me. And I'm not able to see this rope over here, but as you can see here, there's a little weight positioned on this rope that I cannot see. My job is to kind of adjust this pulley system so I tell the experimenter where that weight is on the rope. Again, I can't see the weight. I can just feel the rope as I'm shaking it up or down, or maybe in another condition, the experimenter will kind of just give it a little tap so it shakes up and down on its own. I'm going to be able to feel where that is, whether I'm shaking the rope or the experimenter shaking the rope. Okay, so both cases, right? Okay, so for example, all right, here's a rope I found in the garage. Now this is going to be a little tricky, but imagine the rope is out like this. Well, hold on a second. Boy, it'd be nice if I had tied this up beforehand, huh? Wait. It's an old rope. I'm friendly with the rope, and the rope is saying, hold on. It can pretend it's tight? The rope said it can pretend it's tight? How? Let me see how you can do that, rope. Yeah? Holy cow. Okay, we'll do it this way then. All right, so my hand is on here feeling the rope, right? Just like this. You can tell it's an old rope, all right? And what happens is the rope starts shaking up and down like this, and I'm able to tell where the weight is located on the rope relatively easily and relatively accurately based on this sort of thing, okay? And it has to do with the way the rope would be vibrating. So I could tell accuracy within, say, 5 inches that the rope is, say, 20 feet away from me, or 21 feet away from me, or whatever. I can tell the accuracy within 5 inches based on how this rope is vibrating. And if there's multiple weights on this, you put multiple discs on this, I can tell you that too, and I can tell you roughly which one is heavier than which, all from the vibrations in a rope. So we're not spiders. We can't make our own ropes. We can't make our own webs. But we can use something like a web in order to tell where something is located. How is this done? Well, research that kind of followed this up found that the way the rope vibrates and the way the vibration is kind of conveyed down the rope will tell the hand something about where things are located. Okay, so in other words, we feel the wave and the wave speed and the tension in the rope, and this tells us where that weight is located. It tells us how much weight is there. It tells us whether more than one weight is there. And people are coming to these experiments and saying, there's no way I can do this, but bam, they can do it right away. And I was really amazed at how easy it was when I was there. Thank you. The rope, what's that? You're getting tired? Rope's getting tired. Okay, thank you, Rope. That was nice of you to help us out there. You're able to feel the wave and the rope's tension, and that's going to allow us to perform that. All right. So we can feel things at a distance. That's really the critical thing here. We can feel things at a distance. That's the important thing. Okay. That is the end of our discussion of touch. We're now going to move into a new topic. I think before we do, let me see if there's any questions at this point. I realize we just saw one slide, but this isn't a bad place to take another little break. Let's see. Aida asks, let's see, shaking of the fish rod, is it similar to vibrations in the spider web? Very good question. Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. It is related to the same sort of thing. It's really interesting that in the spider web situation, you can tell the location of the object. And that is true to some degree with the fishing rod, but the fishing rod is a little bit more complicated of a mechanical system, you know, so it's not just the rod, it's also the line. It's also the line. So yes, it's very similar in spirit, but it is a little bit different in the type of judgments that are actually made. Good question, Aida. Any other questions at this point? Any other questions at this point? All right. Well, as I said, there's going to be a special treat for you today. So let me go ahead and pull that up. I am going to, hold on a second. I'm going to hide just for a second. You'll be able to hear me, but I am going to pull up a special guest that's going to entertain you today. All right. Just give me a second. This special guest is none other than Randall. Oops, that didn't come out. The special guest. Oh, I'm sorry. All right. Randall the Comedy Rain Cloud. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen. Let's hear it for Randall. Just trying to entertain you. Hi, I'm Randall. I just came in from the coast, and boy, are my cumulus tired. I've always liked being a rain cloud. You know, the good thing is that I can go to the bathroom anywhere. All right, these all can't be winners, folks. Do you know what type of shorts rain cloud wears? Do you know? Thunderwear. All right. Let's see. I could tell you more jokes about being a rain cloud, but I think you'd find that they were over your head. All right. Anybody got any other jokes? Any one-liners? And me, Randy, the comedy rain cloud, will tell them, and then we can judge them. Anyone got any good one-liners? I can tell you another one in the meantime. Let's see. You know, I don't like the sun too much, but I do find sunburnt people quite attractive. I don't know why. I just find them appealing. Okay. All right.
Randall's
all right. Anyone else got a joke? I'll do a few more. You know, I do take jokes from other people too. So, for example, I have a joke that's I have a friend that's an electrician. And he tells me that he's not a very good one, and people are always shocked to find that out. Let's see, Alex says that Randall's a bit of an airhead. Okay. Any others? Let's see. Andrea says, why do bananas get lonely? Well, why don't they get lonely? Because they all travel in bunches. Randall likes that one. All right, well, I'll just give you a little background of Randall. Randall was kind of tired of making people sad because he was a rain cloud, so he thought he'd be a comedian. He just never got to be a very good one. Oh, well. And then Thomas says, what do you call a cat with no legs? That would be ground beef. All right, thank you very much. I'm Randall. Don't forget to tip your bartenders. I'll be here all week. Okay, we're back. You know, my kids are surprisingly really embarrassed about me. I have no idea why. We were talking yesterday. There was some sort of graduation thing, and my 18-year-old, the guy who's the one that's graduating, said, you know, Mom and Dad, you don't need to go to this part of the online graduation. We said, why not? And he said, well, you are definitely the most embarrassing parents of all my friends. And we said, no, I'm sure all of your friends think their parents are the most embarrassing. And my kids said, no, my friends think that you're the most embarrassing parents of all their friends. So I think it's mostly my fault. My wife's not embarrassing at all. All right, we're going to go to something else now that I think you're going to find really fun. We're going to move to another topic, and I can tell you right now what that topic is. Hold on just a second. Oh, shoot. Just give me a second to set this up here. Yes. We're going to talk about a topic that I've always found really interesting in my laboratory, and it is stuff that we do study, and it's face perception. I'm going to introduce face perception using a concept, oh shoot, called the Uncanny Valley. Okay, hold on, let me share this with you. So what is the Uncanny Valley? I think you're going to find this really interesting. The way for me to best explain this to you is to think about two different movies I believe most of you have seen. I mean, these are going to be older movies for your generation, but they're pretty popular movies. Have most of you seen the movies The Incredibles and The Polar Express? The Polar Express is actually, I'm actually surprised by its durability. It's on almost every holiday season now. When I first saw it, I thought, oh, this is a strange movie. And The Incredibles, I think everybody loves, right? So if I asked you, you know, which of these two movies that hopefully most of you have seen, which one do you prefer? Most people would say The Incredibles probably. I do think it's a better movie. I think the script's better. I think it's hysterical. I think the follow-up they made, the sequel, is actually very good too. But something happened very interesting when these movies came out. They came out on the exact same day. Back when movies were released every Friday, it was a big deal. They were both around, you know, holiday time, and they were initially very popular. But if you go back and search for reviews of these movies, you find something really interesting. Let's take a look at some images from these two movies. The top is an image from The Polar Express. The bottom is an image from The Incredibles. And if I asked you, which of these two characters would you want to spend an hour and a half watching, an hour and a half looking at in a movie? I think most of you would probably say this one. Now, look at this guy. I mean, he is nowhere near what a normal face looks like, right? He's much more kind of like a caricature, like a cartoon of a face, that sort of thing. This is Papa Incredible, Mr. Incredible, right? This guy's much closer to what a human looks like, but boy, is he creepy. Do you guys agree? I mean, it is really creepy. There's something in the eyes that make him really creepy. Okay, and if you go back and look at the reviews, that's a very common comment in the reviews. Reviewers would say, hey, you know, The Polar Express it's got kind of a nice story, and you might remember Tom Hanks has a big part in it. Actually, he plays a number of different characters in it, and he's always fun to watch and listen to, right? But it is creepy, and they said it looks like the characters are almost zombies, or they're possessed like by the devil or something like that. It is weird. And the Incredibles didn't have those sort of comments at all. People didn't even really comment on the look of the characters very much in those reviews. They talked about the story, they talked about the humor, you know, the types of character relationships, you know, the stuff that goes beyond the superficial. But for Polar Express, reviewers concentrated on the look, which is so interesting. Right? Here's some more images. There's Tom Hanks. Now, if I asked you which movie was more expensive to make, despite the popularity of The Incredibles, you might realize The Polar Express was expensive to make because of the way they did it. And you're seeing the way they did it. They had Tom Hanks actually come to the studio and fit him with, you know, one of these motion capture suits that you've probably you know, seen depicted before in different movies. Certainly they did it with all the Hobbit movies, the Lord of the Ring movies and all that, where, you know, they put Andy Serkis in a special suit, and that allows them to track his movement. And then they use those movements to then animate a character. It's a very lengthy, expensive sort of process. Of course, to use Tom Hanks to do this, I'm sure it makes it so expensive, because he's got to be an actor as well as do the voice and all that sort of stuff. It took a long time to make it, and it was a very, very expensive film to make. However, it still came out creepy. The goal for the Polar Express when they were making that movie was to try to make the characters look as realistic as possible. In The Incredibles, they said, nah, let's just make them fun to look at. Let's just make them cartoon characters, and let's just do other things with our time and work on the script and work on the jokes and the story and all that sort of stuff. And the Polar Express really spent tons of time trying to make things look realistic. It clearly backfired. Look, these are two more stills from the Polar Express. They are creepy. This guy haunts my dreams. Whenever I show this every year, when I teach this, this guy is in my dream that night, and he gives me the willies of the worst kind. What is it? What's going on here? This, I think, actually portrays a really interesting thing about faces and the brain. And this is going to be what we're going to call the uncanny valley. Because it looks like that if you try to make a face look natural, look kind of as human as possible, if you don't get it right, it looks creepy. It looks, what's, I think probably the best word is really uncanny. And let me give you this example here. Don't worry about the details of this graph. It's just supposed to illustrate what the idea is. And I think what I talk about in the book is C3PO. It's Star Wars Day, C3PO. So if I asked you, you know, R2-D2 is cute, there's no denying it. But if I asked you which one is kind of more relatable, C3PO or R2-D2? And C3PO, you would probably say, yeah, he's, you know, maybe he's not as cute as R2-D2, but yes, you relate to him. You know, he's a little nervous, you know, he worries, that's kind of cute. But he also looks human. I said, okay, let's make him cuter. Let's now put a jacket and pants on him and a tuxedo. Let's put a tuxedo on C3PO. He said, oh, yeah, that's cute. That's kind of cute. You know, maybe get him to do a little dance with a cane or something with the tuxedo. That's great. So let's put a top hat on him. That's great. Let's put a mustache on him, just like Rosenblum enjoys. We put a mustache on him. That's cool. That's fun. But then you say this. Let's now take a rubber mask of, say, I don't know, somebody famous. I don't want to do this, but Donald Trump. You know, they have the rubber masks of the presidents during Halloween. Let's put a rubber mask on C3PO. It could be any rubber mask. Is he cute anymore? You say, let's not use Donald Trump. That's a terrible example. Let's just put a rubber mask on. Just imagine him wearing a rubber mask that looks like, that's trying to make him look like a normal person. You say, he is no longer cute. C3PO is giving me the heebie-jeebies. He looks eerie. And think about what just happened in that process as we dress C3PO up. We made him kind of more human up to a point, and then all of a sudden, we made him kind of closer to a human in theory. We put a rubber mask that's a human rubber mask on him, but for some reason, all of a sudden, he seems icky. And that's exactly what this is portraying here. And the way this is being portrayed here is with robots. They talk about this a lot in robots. If you're a gamer, you know this is an issue in games, that in some ways, as they try to make the characters in games more and more realistic, they can look creepier and creepier, right? So this at first, it would be like a little industrial robot, like the sort of robot that, you know, they sell now to kids, where it's kind of a cute looking little robot. Maybe it's got wheels and makes cute noises, and you're fine with that. And then maybe, you know, you have it, I don't know, maybe has two little arms that it can move up and down, and it can be used to express emotions, that sort of thing. That's still a cute robot. And then all of a sudden, you take a little rubber mask or something like that, and you try to make its face, its head, look more human, and all of a sudden it gets creepy. This right here, by the way, it says familiarity, But it can be relatability. It can be appealing, and you find your little baby kind of cute kids robot appealing as we kind of make it more human with arms and legs and a little top hat. But then all of a sudden, you put a little rubber mask on, and it falls into this valley where the robot seems uncanny. It seems like it's kind of human, but not really human. And when it hits that point, we find it kind of gross. If you can get it beyond that point, if you can make it look very, very human, then it will go way up, right? But boy, is it hard to avoid that valley. And that's the idea of the Uncanny Valley, that there's a range in which realism on a body, on a face, seems to make it uncanny. It makes any unrealistic features uncanny. So as they move, this is, I think, still the most intuitive example, as they moved from, Mr. Incredible's kind of caricatured, kind of elongated, kind of cartoon face, and kind of brought in the features to make it more and more realistic, as they did here for Polar Express, then all of a sudden, you're noticing things that are weird about it. The eyes all of a sudden appear scary. Okay, it probably would be the same way if I just kind of switched Mr. Incredible's eyes with this guy's eyes. But the more realistic they tried to make the face, okay, the more you notice things that are deviating from a true human face, and it makes it seem scary. Okay, that's the idea of the Uncanny Valley. I can tell you some more things about the Uncanny Valley I think you'll find interesting. First of all, okay, there's the robot example. This is the kind of the classic example they talk about in the research literature, that these robots all kind of seem cute, but then when you start to make their faces more and more human, okay, as these guys are being shown here, things start to get creepy. And these are actually starting to look more natural, but if you see them move, okay, that's why movement is also an issue here. Even though, like from photographs, these look like natural faces of what Einstein, and I think this is supposed to be Philip K. Dick, the author, right? And this is a news reporter in Japan. These photographs make these faces look pretty natural, but if they start moving, they look weird. And if you've ever gone to see an animatronic sorts of shows at Disneyland, Disney World, the Hall of Presidents, I don't know what else they have at Disney World, where things kind of move like this. Even if you took a photo and it looked real, once they start moving like this, right, you hit Uncanny Valley range. But the other things that are interesting about the Uncanny Valley is they seem to be more specific to human forms. So let's go back to the examples of movies. I think these are really great examples. That the Uncanny Valley seems to be more apparent when we look at humans that are being rendered as accurately as possible than things like gorillas and other animals, dogs and other things that are being portrayed as realistic. Okay, we notice these kind of aberrations. We notice these distortions in human forms and faces much more so than we notice them in animals. So I just watched this movie. It's a really pretty good movie. This is the King Kong that came out not too long ago. Not the old version of King Kong, which is interesting in its own way, but the it's the same director, Peter, what's his name? The same guy that did the Lord of the Rings movie did a King Kong, and man, you look at that gorilla, and I don't know how accurately I can judge the realism of a gorilla in a movie, but you never kind of get that feeling you get when you look at an animated face, a human face, in a movie or commercial or something like that. It seems to be specific to human forms, and importantly for our concerns, it seems to be most conspicuous with faces. We seem, as an audience, as a perceiver, most sensitive to when there's distortions in faces than anything else, right? So you could imagine if these faces were okay, we would accept the bodies as realistic enough. My God, look at this little elf right here. I can't believe they made this movie for kids. Anyway, yes, it seems to be most obvious in faces. So how does this work? Why is this the case? And what I'm going to answer, there's lots of ways we can answer this question, right? The answer I'm going to give first is to the question, why does it make us feel icky? Why does it give us the heebie-jeebies? Why does it give us kind of the feeling that it's eerie? And one theory is that when we see something that should be human but doesn't seem alive in a human way, it kind of repulses us. And that repulsion might be connected to the repulsion we probably evolved to stay away from corpses with. Okay? In other words, it's adaptive for us to stay away from dead bodies. It really is. And we do find corpses repulsive and icky and creepy and that sort of thing. And we probably have ways of identifying things that look like humans but don't seem alive in the right way, right? And so that a kind of adaptation has probably carried over to situations where you're seeing something that should look human but doesn't seem alive in the right way. And so our feeling, our kind of ickiness that we have kind of reflexively from seeing these sort of things is probably related for our kind of sensitivity to seeing corpses and staying away from them. But the part I want to emphasize in this discussion, actually, I think you're going to find very interesting. It tells us that because the uncanny valley seems most striking for faces, and human faces in particular, and you've noticed this, I'm sure, if you're a gamer and you play games with where maybe famous sports figures, my younger son plays Madden a lot, Madden football, and his favorite player is Tom Brady. Okay, don't blame me, but his favorite player is Tom Brady, the famous Tom Brady. And so he uses Tom Brady's avatar a lot when he's playing. And boy, you can tell they worked really hard to make Tom Brady look like Tom Brady. But after all these years having worked on that avatar with Madden, after they revise and improve the game every year, it still gives me the heebie-jeebies. I mean, you look at Tom Brady's face and it's supposed to be Tom Brady, but the way he moves, the way his eyes move, the way his eyes move relative to his head, there's just something in there that looks really, really weird. And it's clear that we are so sensitive, our perceptual brains are so sensitive to faces that we can pick out any little aberration that's in there. Okay, what I'm going to do now is take a few questions real quickly, but I want to continue this discussion because I think there's something else you're going to find very interesting about this. Yes, Benjamin said the Polar Express is a master class in the Uncanny Valley. You're absolutely right. That's why I put it in the book. As you'll see in the book, I actually interviewed somebody who worked on the problem. I'll talk about that in just a second. And he, this was years after the Polar Express came out. Everybody in his field, in the computer animation field, referred to the Polar Express as the worst example, or one of the worst examples of how animation could fail and create an uncanny valley problem. It's a very good point. Is the uncanny valley, the more the character looks real human, the more eerie we think about it? That's exactly right, Aida. That's exactly right. I recommend you check out a channel on YouTube that covers the uncanny valley and visual effects. Oh, that'd be wonderful. I'll do that, Benjamin. Clearly you're interested in this. I will look at that and I will link it. And some of the examples are even scary. Benjamin then asks, since humans are experts at detecting actual human faces by sight, what about those who were blind and recovered their vision? Are they affected similarly to us by the uncanny valley? Do they have to learn what a human face? Okay, Benjamin, you're asking a question that is like one of the most important questions in perceptual psychology. If one were to be blind for their entire life and then all of a sudden regain their sight, what could they perceive? And would that be something that would be different for faces versus non-faces? And I'm going to tell you this. There is now a literature that exists based on a group of patients in rural India who had hundreds of patients we're talking about that had been born with cataracts, and because of where they lived, didn't until very recently have the ability to have cataract surgery, and then basically had vision for the first time in their lives. And I will tell you this, the story is much more complicated than just they could or could not recognize faces. It is very complicated. It depends a little bit on the person, but it also depends on what aspect of faces you're discussing. if they put a facial image in front of this person who just started to see for the first time in 30 years, they would say it's a face. Whether they then could put the face of their mother up and say, and then another woman, and ask them, which of these faces is your mom? Could you tell us? Some could and some couldn't. So it's a very, very complicated story. We were just in my graduate course discussing this yesterday. So you're asking really sophisticated questions. Good for you folks. Oh, yes, we will, Aida, talk about inversion in just a second. But let me continue to talk, and I'm not going to be able to finish this entire slide, but I do want to get into it right now. So let me go back here and talk about this. And this is something that was just amazing in my experience with this. So I wrote the chapter on faces and the uncanny valley back in 2009, I think it was, something like that. And the uncanny valley was a persistent problem in movies and TV commercials. I can talk about all the different things that it showed, where it was very apparent. Some very, very scary commercials were coming out at the time, including commercials that were being created by this individual right here, whose name is Steve Prieg. Steve worked on a number of commercials where he knew they tried to reanimate Orville Redenbacher. Do you know who he is? The popcorn guy. And they were having a really terrible time. And if you look at that original Orville Redenbacher commercial, after he died, actually, they reanimated him and tried to put him in a commercial again. It is really creepy. And he was very aware of that, which was interesting. But then a movie came out that Steve Prieg also worked on called The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. And this is a movie starring Brad Pitt in which his character ages in reverse. Maybe some of you have seen it. It's worth seeing. It's a good movie. It's nicely done. But the character ages in reverse. So he starts off as an old man and then grows into a younger person. And what that's like for him, both emotionally and physically, and all this sort of stuff. It's kind of a parable. It's kind of a mythical story, but it's nicely done. But boy, was it hard to make. How are you going to portray somebody aging in reverse? You could imagine how hard something like that would be. And Steve Prieg and the company he worked for, Digital Domain, decided to take on the problem. And what they realized they needed to do was solve the problem, or at least be convincing in solving the problem of the uncanny valley. They basically realized that for the first half of the movie, where basically it's a very old-looking Brad Pitt it's a small body, I believe, which is it's showing. That's what it's showing here. They had to make an actual kind of animated puppet of Brad Pitt's face. And so in other words, if you see the movie, you'll go through the first, I think it's a 2-hour movie. The first hour of the movie, you'll swear you're seeing Brad Pitt, but it isn't. It's an animated Brad Pitt that they were actually able to create and actually mold the emotions of. It's not motion capture. It is a puppet version of Brad Pitt's face that's done in animation. And we'll talk about exactly how that was done next class. See you next time.